Today it gives me great pleasure to say I will be taking a look at the NECA Street Scene Diorama. This is something I've wanted for a very long time because I look at other people's collections with great envy when they have all these fantastic custom-made dioramas to display their figures in, and sadly I don't have the creative talent or the time to be able to dedicate to create these kind of dioramas. I really would love one. So I think it's absolutely fantastic that NECA have come along and actually ready-made and produced one for people like me. Now this set was released a few years ago now, and since then they don't seem to have followed up with any other dioramas, any other environments or anything like that, which is a shame because I think this is a really cool thing. And I think they probably could have branched out into doing all sorts of environments, spaceships and jungles and laboratories, and well, the list goes on and on and on. But I'm glad to say that if we only got this one, then this is, for me, probably the best one they could have done. Having that street scene, it's so applicable for any number of different scenarios, for different figures, that it's kind of perfect, really. Now, why did I hold off so long from picking it up? Well, it's pretty expensive, and it was difficult to tell from the initial photos just what we were getting. It looks very nice, of course, but from the images I couldn't really tell the proper sizing of it, or how solid, or even just, the depth and the amount of figures it could actually accurately hold. But I did finally see one going for a fairly reasonable price, and I thought, yeah, you know what, it's time to pull the trigger on this. And so here it is in its packaging. On the front we have, of course, a couple of images of the scene, and there's a little bit of text to say it's over 2 feet tall, and I can confirm it's also over 2 feet wide, and it boasts that you can easily display over 30 figures at once. Well, I think that all comes down to interpretation. I'm not sure. It depends on the scale of the figure that you place in there, I think. But nevertheless, it does hold quite a few. And on the reverse we can see a little bit more information here about what this display is all about. And of course it says it accommodates most figures between 6 inches and 9 inches tall. That's obviously very important because NECA usually produce figures in the 7-inch scale. They do of course have their sort of Mego type, which are about 9 inches. So of course it is to accommodate both sizes. Now, to be honest, I have to say I think it really works best with the 7-inch scale. I think you can get away with 6, no problem. But I think really anything above 7 inches starts to look a little bit out of scale. But as you can see here, it also comes with 2 different backgrounds. We have the day background and we have the night background, so you can create different looks for this diorama, which is great. So it does come flat packed and it does take a little bit of assembly, but you don't need any screws or screwdrivers or anything like that. It does all basically just click into place, which is pretty good. And here it is fully assembled, and I have to say, first impressions, this is very striking. It looks really cool, and it is really big. Like it's humongous, which is brilliant. Now, as I said, the pieces of this set come together by just clicking into place, and you can see that the pavement of the sidewalk is made up of 6 or 7 plastic pieces, so there is that little gap there, but it looks aesthetically correct. It looks appropriate for what you'd see in a street scene. It might look a little bit flimsy, but it's pretty solid. But you're given some flexibility in where you want certain pieces to go, so you can swap out doors and windows in different parts of the diorama. And I have to say, I think the attention to detail in the brickwork is absolutely fantastic. As you can see, all the individual cement pieces look great, the bricks themselves are very nicely done, and there's different paint washes going through to give it that real authentic lived-in feel. And the pavement is very nicely done. I love the yellow border going around the edge. Just gives it a bit of colour there, but it looks really cool. On one side we have that curved edge, and the other it's a flat edge. And you can see there's little bits of texture and a little bit of cracks running through these pavement pieces, which is a nice touch. There's also some little extras here, like we can see with the extractor fan, which again just clicks into place. You can just pull that out, and you can rearrange these wherever you want because there's a number of different holes that basically are filled with bricks, but you can basically put this extractor fan wherever you want it on any level, on any of these walls, and you can remove these bricks and put other things in their place if you have that inclination. The window panes are really kind of cool. They're made of a sheet plastic there that click into place on the reverse, which is very cool. These pieces are all not only just slot into place, but they're also held together with magnets as well to give it that bit more rigidity, which is a nice touch. And one of the things I love about this is the fact that you can place figures behind the windows there, so you can have them peering out. I think this is wonderful and wasn't something I was expecting. And I'll take a closer look at some of the space that's available to these figures a little bit later on these levels. But for now, I did want to point out that if you wanted to customize this with lights, you can actually uplight your figures and have the lights coming through the windows. Would be very cool. I tried to put some fairy lights in there to just give the impression of what what that might look like, but they're quite dim and it's not really showing up too well here. The two main pieces of the wall are held together and there's a bit of an unsightly gap, and this is covered very nicely by this exterior bit of brickage and a drain pipe. And this is very nicely done. It's a cool little extra touch, but I think it's well executed as well. I think again the paint apps on this look fantastic. I also really like this shutter door where you only get one of these pieces, but I think it's really nicely done. Again, there's a little bit of colour on it, which is cool, and it's well applied. Again, just gives that grainy sort of like slightly dirty wash going through it, which is fab. And because of that removability of the piece there, I think it's kind of fun that you could actually have a figure bursting out of it as well. Now, it's not perfect. Maybe if you had some of those free bricks lying around that the piece comes with, you could actually create an effect that he's just burst through the wall here. So you could have a character like the Juggernaut, or in this case, Bulldozer, and I think this is really very cool. Now then, moving on to the second level. It might be difficult to tell, but this is quite a wide platform and can comfortably hold quite big figures. Once again, we have the window frames here, and of course these are the same pieces that we could swap out for a brick wall if we wanted, or place that vent up here instead of downstairs. And again, we can store some figures on this level as well, staring through the windows. And so, case in point, here we have a figure in the 6-inch scale, which looks very comfortable. As you can see, there's lots of room around him, and looks in really nice proportion with the dimensions of this level. And here we can see we've got a builder figure. He's about 7 inches tall, and again, he's quite a chunky figure, but he looks very comfortable on this level. Plenty of space around him, and there's no danger or threat of the base giving way and him falling through. And in case you're curious to see how it works with a 5-inch scale figure, well, here we can see the character options Doctor Who line. Obviously, this first level easily supports the TARDIS, and I should point out that this is the Christopher Eccleston / David Tennant TARDIS, which is a fair bit wider and taller than the classic series TARDIS. And I think the scaling here still works. I don't think this is bad at all. The windows seem a little higher and a little larger, but if you keep this consistent with your other 5-inch figures, it won't be a problem. And taking the same approach for the bottoms here, we can see that the TARDIS is slightly too big really to fit on the sidewalk, but the 5-inch figure fits fairly comfortably here. I think the door seems a little bit too large, but it's not really that noticeable. I think you get away with that quite happily. And to give you a sense of depth for this first tier, we can see just how wide this wall is here. There's actually tons of space to place some additional figures around the outside. Case in point, here I have one of the oversized deluxe Marvel Legends figures, so you can see here that obviously there's a ton of space and it hides him very, very nicely behind this wall. So you could probably get 2 or 3 6-inch or 5-inch figures here, no problem. And now if we look up to the final tier, this is the top level of the set. We can see the cardboard cityscape backdrop and the narrow ledge for figures to stand on. The backdrop itself is very nice. I happen to have a preference for the nighttime because that tends to be when a lot of the superheroes come out and a lot of the moody set action pieces take place in the films. I think this is very nicely done. I don't think it's meant to represent any city in particular. I mean, I may be wrong, but yes, I don't recognise any of these buildings or this skyline, so I think it's just a generic city, which is great. That's absolutely perfect. And it's tall enough to tower over any figures you put on this ledge here, so it's probably a good 8 inches tall, maybe 9 inches tall. So if you've got a 6-inch figure like Batman here, or to be fair, even say a Predator, a 7-inch Predator figure, I don't think there's any danger that it's going to tower above the backdrop here. I think it's going to look nicely framed. Now this top level is the narrowest of all the platforms, but you can see it's still plenty wide. So I've got a nice 5-inch Dalek on here, which is quite a wide base, and he fits on very nicely. There's still plenty of room for him to manoeuvre. I don't think there's any danger that your figures are going to be tripping over themselves or falling off this ledge very easily. Now you may notice that I've swapped the background around for the Dalek there, and this is the alternate side. This is the daylight backdrop that we can see. So again, generic city. I don't think it's meant to be anything in particular, but it's a very nicely rendered piece of work. And to flip it around is fairly straightforward, so you have these plugs that hold it in place, and if I'm being totally honest, this is a little bit flimsy. It's not quite as secure as you might like, especially if you're using the night backdrop, as the card tends to want to fold over this way anyway, so it's always forcing those pins out. So you're probably always going to be best placing this up against a wall for extra support. And when we open up the backdrop, we can see here the amount of space that is available to place our figures. The bottom tier is the widest, and it's quite considerably wide, enough so that we can place our figures in the windows, but we could even have some extra figures in here. We could even have some furniture and things like that if you wanted to put something in and make this more of an environment internally. To give you a sense of the potential and the scope, here obviously is that deluxe Maestro figure, so again, very big figure here, obviously towering above the NECA 7-inch figures there, and again, he fits in very comfortable, plenty of space around him. And then we can throw in some extra figures so you can see that there's enough depth here to have 2 or 3 figures in a row. Now you'll notice that the second tier though is a lot tighter for space. Like, this is a very narrow band for your figures to stand, and they stand pretty comfortably, but really I don't think you want to push this beyond 4 figures at a time, because yeah, it's a little bit cramped up here and it'd be very easy for these figures to fall backwards. Now at the top here you might notice there's a little peg hole there that's adjustable, so you can put these in different places and they line up of course with the backdrop, so you can place those pegs through the holes there and it secures it into place. You might also notice there's these plastic beams which click into place into the top tier there. The idea being that this provides extra support in the top paneling when there's gaps in the between to stop them from falling in on themselves. The only trouble is that it doesn't really work, to be honest. This is far too flimsy plastic. They don't really click into place properly, at least not in mine. They tend to flop out anyway, and I don't really believe they're adding much extra support, so yeah, so far I can say I've had no problems by placing my figures on here. There's no danger of them falling in, so I don't think these are strictly necessary. So we've established that this is over 2 feet tall. To try and give you a sense of scale, here's a 12-inch action figure. Obviously it doesn't even come halfway up this diorama. And here we have the 14-inch Build-A-Figure Apocalypse, and it still comfortably dwarfs him. I think it's a good bet that if you had an 18-inch figure, that they still wouldn't reach the top of this. And to give it just a bit more context in terms of its scale and size, here you can see my cat Merlin. He's having a good time exploring and investigating this diorama, and you can see it towers above him, and it's longer than him as well. So yeah, this is a really big set piece, and yeah, it's fantastic, ideal to place your figures. Now, of course, on the packaging, it does boast that it can hold over 30 figures. I think that's probably a little bit ambitious. On display here, I have 16 figures. That includes the 3 on the top, 3 on the middle tier, and 4 on the bottom. It also includes 4 figures in the windows on the second tier and 2 on the bottom tier. And already this is starting to feel a little bit crowded. I personally wouldn't opt for more than 4 figures on any row, and I think the optimum number would really be 3. Now that being said, it's all down to personal preference. For me, I think it gets a little bit cluttered and doesn't look that great, and I want it to look really impressive. I want it to be the centerpiece of my display, my collection. So for me, I want it to look really attractive to the eye, and I think, you know, I want a little bit of space between the characters really to really feel like I'm displaying them properly. But there's nothing to stop you bunging in, say, 5 figures on a row if you really just want to stack them up. But that would still take you up to about 21 figures, I think, if we included the ones inside staring through the windows. So I think in order for NECA's calculation to be correct, I think they also have to be including the figures that are being stored that are not on display, so ones that are inside the building, which I think is a fair assessment, because this is a very convenient way to kind of store figures that maybe you don't want on display at that moment as well. So I think it's quite handy to have that. I think then you could round this out to about 30. Either that, or you could be looking at a much smaller scale, because I think you get a lot more, say in the 5-inch scale, if you want to use your character options Doctor Who figures, for example, you get an awful lot more on this display there. But that's such a minor point. I'm really, really delighted with this. I think it's an absolutely fantastic display. I think there's all sorts of potential to create all kinds of different interesting and dynamic photo opportunities, or just looks to have on display, really. I just think it's fantastic. I think it's really, really fun. I love that it's fairly versatile, that you can move things around, that you can kind of create the look exactly that you want, that you can change it between night and day. And, you know, there's also a possibility, if you're really into customizing things, you can add, I don't know, some graffiti on the walls, or whatever, really. You could do some battle damage. There's tons and tons and tons of options here, and I think it's always going to look fantastic. So for me, this is a bit of a dream come true. I think NECA have been really, really careful in being able to make it dynamic enough that it can support a whole range of different scales. I think it's really clever. Works really well with all sorts of different characters and different universes. And I think being able to have them on display like this and mix and match is absolutely fantastic. So a really, really excellent job. And I couldn't be happier to have this in my collection. So if you're on the fence about this, if you didn't get it and you can afford it, then I would recommend it, because I think it's really solid, and I think, you know, it's a big centerpiece. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.